Hello, and welcome back to the Embodied and Sovereign podcast. On today's episode, I have the pleasure of interviewing Lian Brook-Tyler. Lian is the co-founder of Primal Happiness and a soul embodiment guide for world changers, misfits, and magical ones. Her mythical journey began when she leapt from the corporate leadership onto the path of spirituality, after she suddenly and somewhat mysteriously recovered from 15 years of chronic pain and anxiety. That inexplicable transformation led her to immerse herself in discovering what creates struggle, and conversely, how to create a life overflowing with love, truth, beauty, and magic. Her work today is focused on leading men and women along the soul-led, open-hearted, sovereign path of waking the wild, guiding them to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. Lian also lives in a 400-year-old quintessentially English country cottage with her husband, 2 children, and an array of ginger rescue animals. She is living into her vision of liberating wild souls to be the unique medicine they came here to be. Lian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, such a pleasure. How could I say no? Firstly, it's you. And then the name of your podcast, I'm like, oh, yes, that's where I'm meant to be.
Yes, I know. I was excited to ask you to be on here because I knew a lot of your messaging really resonated similarly. So,
Hmm.
yes. Um, so, one of the first things when I was actually reading your bio, um, I like to dig a little deeper with guests on the podcast on what your own journey was like. I feel like this helps listeners who may feel lost or searching hear how others have gone through similar processes and give them a deeper sense of trust and faith. I know in my own process, it has been so vital having role models and just knowing where they came from and knowing their journey. So when you shifted from the corporate world into soulful business, you suddenly had this recovery from 15 years of chronic pain and anxiety. Can you just share a little bit more about what was going on for you that led you to make this big leap?
Mm. It's just as well you're not asking me back then because I didn't have the faintest clue. I would have been like, I don't know. It took me a good few years to join the dots backwards and have some sense of what actually took place. And interestingly, each year that goes by, I guess I join another dot. And so anytime that I share the story, it's with this, I guess, a deeper understanding of what actually did happen. Um, so in short, the the catalyst to that was losing my father suddenly. And I've shared in many different podcasts and shows before that he raised me, so we're a single parent family, so we were incredibly close. And I'd always had this kind of, I think, a deeper fear than is typical about the idea of losing him one day. It was almost like verging on a phobia. How it was, I'd sort of imagine like one day he's going to die because, hey, he's human and people do. And my goodness, I can't even imagine how would I continue. Almost now I look back and think it's almost like I had a premonition that my life actually would, as it was, come to
Mm.
an end, because that's actually what did happen, but not at all in the way that I'd feared. So he died very suddenly in a road traffic accident. And the following year was, on one level, absolute hell. There were so many um just terrible things happening, in terms of there was a inquest in terms of mistakes that the police had made, that the ambulance had made. He had to have 2 post-mortems. There was just havoc being wreaked within my family. um it was an incredibly difficult year. It was a kind of like, not just dealing, just in quote marks, dealing with the death of my father, but just all of the things that had come as a
Mm.
result. And yet, simultaneously, and this came at the very day that he died, I just suddenly saw, oh my goodness, there is something so much deeper going on.
Mm.
And it was a very visceral, tangible sense I had, but I had no way of putting words to it. I actually
Mhm.
wondered at times, am I losing my mind? Because no one else seems to be thinking and feeling like I am. Everyone else is only seeing all the horror and the nightmares and the drama.
Mm.
And I can, it's not like I'm kind of floating above that. I can see that and experience that, but simultaneously, I just kept noticing such beauty, such connectedness, such love. And over the course of that year, I was just changing radically, absolutely just thinking, what the hell is happening to me? I'm just not the same woman anymore, but in a
Mm.
really good way, like the opposite of everything I thought would happen.
Yeah.
And towards the end of that year, I realized that something had happened that was profound and was something I could use to help other people, if only I could describe
Right, right.
it. But I was still at the point where I've like no idea what's going on. And I can see now in hindsight, and I really don't like words like kind of spiritual awakening, but really, I guess that's what happened.
Mm.
It just took me a long time to click on, partly probably because I had even then it's resistance to like, oh no, like
Yeah.
that's a load of rubbish. So yeah, and even now I really don't really I think that gives us a kind of lot of weight and a kind of like a seeking that we need to have
Mm.
an awakening. So
Yeah.
but I guess simply put, that's what happened. All I did know was there was something that I was experiencing, seeing, that if I could find a way to share that with others, it could be helpful to others. That was the
Mm.
only thing I knew. So I went on this quest to understand, you know, how could I, in some way or other, like create an experience for others that allows them to see this? You know, is that coaching? Is this therapy? Is it this? Is it this? And this is the most unspiritual part of this whole story. I'm standing in my kitchen Googling, and I got this website up, and it was about a form of spirituality called Three Principles. It's like an ascension path. And this particular description was naming different facets of it. And it said something like, just really basic, and what I'm about to say is not, don't hold on thinking, oh my gosh, she's about to tell me the answer to everything. But this one line said something really simple, like thought creates your reality.
Mm.
And it was just like an explosion went off in my mind.
Mm.
And I just stood in my kitchen like, oh my goodness,
Mm.
oh my goodness, nothing looks the same. And
Yeah.
so it's like the year that I'd had prior was almost like, I think I'd kind of caught up with that, and then something else had just in my head. And coming back, this is a very long-winded way of coming back, the next bit's quite short. Coming back to your question, so for the prior 15 years, I'd had a very traumatic event which had left me with panic attacks, anxiety, chronic facial pain. And I tried all sorts of things, including I'd even been prescribed anti-epilepsy drugs to try
Mm.
and deal with the facial pain, and nothing had touched it. It just stayed the same all those years. Anyway, week after that Google in the kitchen moment, it all went just like that.
Mm. Wow.
And
Wow.
so I was then left with this like, okay, so I've had this year of kind of like floating around in, you know, a state of bliss to a large extent, whilst dealing with all of the ramifications of my father's death. I've now had this extra explosion go in my mind, which has got rid of all these panic attacks, anxiety, and facial pain. I really need to do something with this now.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
it was just clear, like, I do need to find a way of putting this out, trained in that particular form of spirituality as a coach. And I think it was 5 or 6 months later, I'd left. So I started that part-time around my job. 5 or 6 months later, left the corporate world and started on the path I'm on now. So that
Mm.
was 2013.
Okay.
Hmm.
All right. Yeah, that I feel like I like asking this question to people because it is so hard to describe, especially while you're going through it. Like we don't realize what's happening a lot of times, and I think a lot of people can relate to being like, am I losing my mind? What's going on? Like no one else seems to be talking about this or having
Mm,
experiences like this. Um, and even like you said, like after the fact, in hindsight, it can still be challenging to be like, what did happen? And I like asking it because I feel like it gives us like clarification for ourselves too. Like when we inquire within ourselves, like, okay, this is what happened, even like and offering that more depth and insight in your own work too, right? Like,
mm,
okay, this is what okay, little more is clicking of like what did
yes.
happen with me.
Yeah, so it's such importance in telling our stories. Yeah,
Hmm.
I see. Yeah, it's probably once a month I see something else. Like, oh
Yeah,
wow,
yeah,
that
yeah,
took a while to see, but yeah, it's just how it is. Mm.
yeah. um So in one of your YouTube videos, I was watching on embodiment of the feminine, which is a particular interest of mine. You describe an aspect of your work as the descent into the feminine, like into the body, and kind of how this process is like an initiation or rite of passage into adulthood, into sovereignty. And I would just love to hear a little bit more about how you usher this process for your clients.
Mm. It links actually to a large extent back to what we're just talking about now. This when we're having this call, whether it be a kind of this gentler sense of being called towards something or kind of being plunged into some form of awakening or descent, we have very little in the way of models and guides in our
Mhm.
culture,
Yeah.
which is why it can be such a scary and confusing experience.
Mm.
And when we look at indigenous cultures, it's just not that way. We have that guidance and those role models absolutely baked into the culture. This isn't just left to chance. This isn't
Yeah.
left to an individual to just try and figure out what the hell's happening. In fact, the podcast that we'll be releasing next week is with a chap called Tim Corcoran, who part of his work is guiding boys into initiations into
Oh,
manhood. Sorry, my dog's
that's
rolling in the
okay.
background. And starting from a very young age, there would be these initiations, these rites of passage, where we're taking people through different portals that allow them to experience a different way of being, to step into this
Mm.
next stage. And that's just lacking terribly in our culture. We are just bereft of that understanding, let alone
Mhm.
the actual experiences and being held through those experiences, guided
Yeah.
through those experiences. So, as Jonathan and I have, I guess, created the body of the work we do now, Wake the Wild, we really have been very influenced by what we see as innate, natural, essential even to human beings when we are thriving, when we are living in the way that we're actually designed to live, that we
Mm.
evolved to live. And so we are very consciously creating those experiences for our clients. The work, the entirety of the work we might do with someone, whether that be in a one-to-one package or a group package, the entire thing, we are very clearly naming like this is initiation. This
Mm.
is you walking through a portal through which you will be integrating what's in shadow and then coming out the end of it into this expanded person, the person you came here to be. And so, specifically linking to the question you've asked around the descent, I really love Bill Plotkin's work.
Mm.
I don't know if you've read his books, so very much about this path of the soul and wilderness as being one of those portals. And he has this beautiful kind of map, let's say, of the human psyche and talks about the ascension path, which are those kind of mainstream forms of spirituality, which is really kind of like
Mm.
ways to understand that non-separation, that of us that is all. And yet we are here as individual humans in these
Mm-hmm.
unique, beautiful forms, and are here, I believe, to have our own unique experience.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I see, and this is again using Bill Plotkin's naming of this, the descent is actually to go more deeply into ourselves. So the
Mm.
ascension is to go out of ourselves into, and again, there's nothing wrong with this, all is needed,
Yeah.
but there's that kind of ascension to spirit and the descent into our bodies, into our souls, into that connectedness with the earth.
Mm.
And so if, for example, I'm working with a woman, they'll begin that very clear naming. They're working with us, and it depends again, there could be a particular type of work. Right now, we're leading a circle called Waking World Medicine, which is very much about people becoming their soul work. It could be in one of our one-to-one packages, Waking World Sovereign, which is, as the name says,
Mm-hmm.
becoming sovereign. But the whole thing is held in this deep understanding. This is you returning deeply into yourself. The whole work is an initiation. The
Mm.
whole work is you becoming, well, another way of describing sovereignty is a true adult,
Mm.
no longer being run by those compulsions that are really those fear-based patterns from childhood stories, which is really how most people operate in the
Mm-hmm.
world. They're
Yeah.
adult in name, but they're really emotionally children
Right.
until they've done this work, until they've gone through these initiations and become true adults, fully embodied,
Mm.
power integrated. So it's no longer in shadow, it's back into their bodies and here available to use consciously in alignment with their will.
Mm.
So I think that answered the question.
Yeah.
There was a lot there, but
I
it's
just,
definitely a very interesting
I
topic.
could listen to you talk about this forever. I absolutely love it. And I think yeah, that's one reason I resonate with what you share so often is, this idea that it is important to have that feeling of oneness, right? But I feel like a lot of our spiritual culture, like neo-spiritualism, focuses on that quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
and not so much on our unique individuality. And that's why,
Yes.
like, I think probably for both of us, like, embodiment and sovereignty is so, it's like the balance to that oneness. Like, we're not meant to just be all one, or we wouldn't be in these individual human bodies, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What would be the point?
Yeah, what's the point? Yeah.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
oh, I love that. So sovereignty is one of the three tenets of your work in your program, Waking the Wild. Can you just share a little bit more about why sovereignty?
Mm. I just had this smile come over my face thinking about the first time that Jonathan mentioned sovereignty as a kind of, as a, I guess, a principle, which now I don't know how many years that was, but I remember when he first said it, it often is the case, the amount of times Jonathan's been right about something that years later I'm like, I'm sorry. In fact, I did exactly the same with embodiment. Actually, that's just reminded me too. I'm very used to eating humble pie, so it was all good. Yeah, so I guess the reason that this is so embedded in our work, and it really is, it doesn't matter whether our program is called Wake the Wild Sovereign or
Mm,
it's any of our other programs, it's always integral to everything we do,
mm,
because without it, it's so easy to get lost in that swamp of victimhood. It's
mm,
very easy, as particularly the depth of the work that we're doing with people, we are taking them right back into those old stories that have been running their lives. We're taking them right into their wounds.
mm.
This is deeply painful, very emotional, very potent material that we're working with. And without that lens of sovereignty, it's so easy to become identified with it. And I see this
Yep.
often happen in inner child work too. Again, amazing body of work, shadow work, really amazing, powerful work.
Mm.
And what can very much happen is we become identified with the
Yes.
pain, identified
Yep.
with the wound, identified with the struggle, identified as particularly again with the inner child.
Mm.
And from there, there's no adult in the house.
Yep.
We end
Oh.
up being the child, as opposed to someone who can be in relationship, hold, see, tend, love the inner child. So it's so clear to us it's essential to do this work well, where people do end up actually reclaiming their power in a way that they can consciously use it. Sovereignty is essential. Otherwise, we're doing everything through that same lens of victimhood, which isn't going to allow you to create anything that's in alignment with your true vision. It's not going to allow you to create anything that's in alignment with love. So while, you know, our other two tenets are that open-heartedness, i.e. kind of doing everything from love, the other part is being led by soul, doing what you came here to do. But without sovereignty, I don't think either of those other two things are possible. It really is the the part that creates that sense of I am able to choose my reality, create my reality, choose how I respond. I do not need to be a victim to anything, including my past, including my wounds.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's, I think if you're doing that kind of depth of work, it is probably dangerous, honestly, to do it without the focus on sovereignty too.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I can definitely see past experiences where like it does seem like damage has been done more than I mean the self-reflection is helpful, you know, obviously, but yeah, without that sense of empowerment, it's it just it makes people feel more helpless and victimized.
Yeah, it's really, in a way, reliving the original patterns.
Yeah.
If we think that for most of us, those wounds were created in childhood and were to some extent created because there wasn't a true adult in the house,
Right.
metaphorically and literally.
Yeah.
If we then go back to do the work to look at those patterns and there is no true adult in the house, we're
Right.
doing the same thing again.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, because you work with men and women, um, do you hold a similar process for both? And do you notice any general, like, overarching differences between, like, the processes between, like, what men and women go through, like, through this kind of initiation or this rite of passage?
Mm. So those tenets are absolutely the same, you know, again, goes
Yeah.
through everything we do, no matter what the program is, no matter who
Mm.
the person is. And yet we see that part of that honoring who we are includes our biology and
Mhm.
includes our lived experience.
Mm. Yeah.
And so if we're working with a woman, we will absolutely be in the work of guiding her, as I said, back into a body, which is a woman's body.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
it's, for me, just so fundamental that she has that deep, deep intimacy with all parts of herself, deep love and reverence for her menstrual cycle,
Mhm.
complete
Yeah.
connection with her breasts,
Mm.
complete this sense of just being able to open and relax sexually. These
Mm.
aren't just kind of separate little things that you can kind of ignore.
Yeah.
Again, when we want to bring all power back to be able to use it in that way that is conscious and in line with our will, you know, particularly when we're talking about sexuality, like, wow, so much of our power is held there.
Mhm.
So it's the real differences will be partly that, in terms of, you know, what does that mean for a woman, say biologically, and reclaiming herself from those places that have been wounded or frozen by trauma, and the same for a man. And then there's also the archetypal lens in terms of the archetypal feminine, the archetypal masculine. And for, and I don't think there's any kind of coincidence about this, it's obviously because of what we're putting out there in terms of the world. I have a complete devotion to embodying the divine feminine.
Mm. Yeah.
That is a vow I've taken.
Mm.
And so women that are magnetized to come and work with us, they know that. And chances are they also feel that deep call. Otherwise,
Yeah.
they would choose a different teacher.
Yeah.
So a big part of our work will be being in that very conscious choosing guidance of what that means for that, again, unique woman
Mm-hmm.
to embody that archetypal energy. It will be
Mm.
different to how I embody. There's no right way. There's not a right way to be a woman. That each of us will have a unique way of doing that, be a unique channel for the feminine. Obviously, the
Mm.
same again for a man. But because of that, it's not something that, again, I see as separate or kind of like a facet of our work. It's if you've come here as a soul who has a call to embody the feminine, that belongs right in the center of the work.
Mm.
It isn't something that we can kind of like do as an offshoot or is kind of like only for some. It appears to me that for every one of our clients, they will have some degree, firstly, of wounding
Mm-hmm.
around their own bodies, their lived experiences as a man or a woman. They'll also have some wounding around the masculine and feminine,
Mm-hmm.
and they likely will have some degree of calling to embody those energies more consciously.
Mm.
So the differences are very, they're unique to each person, but certainly, because you can probably hear in what I've said, there's vast differences
Yeah.
really between the work we do with men and women for that reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I always like to ask this question too. So when you're working with your clients, what is one of your favorite experiences or realizations to witness and facilitate for them?
This is linked to sovereignty, as we were talking earlier.
Mm.
And sometimes I notice this happens in a kind of one moment where they suddenly see this clearly. Sometimes it's a growing realization that does come with some resistance, understandably. But really, it's that realization that they are
Mm.
that creator of their life. They are not beholden to anyone. They are not a victim to anyone. They're not on the mercy of anyone. They
Mm.
choose.
Yeah.
They can create life as they want, and they are creating it already, even if they've not been conscious of that.
Yeah.
And again, we go in and out of that awareness. Sometimes that looks less available than others. But there is definitely this point we reach where we can't unsee that. Is a point I see that once we've seen that clearly and deeply enough, it lasts. We
Mm-hmm.
cannot go back after that point. And often, like, notice there's a point in our work with someone where they're like right up against it. What I call it the sovereign price, where there's like a life change they want to
Mm.
take, and it's going to come at a cost.
Yeah.
And so I call it a sovereign price. Like, it will cost you, and it's in alignment.
Yeah.
Versus the victim price, which is carrying as normal. You kind of have your cake and eat it, but it's not a particularly nice cake.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of like, oh, this is so hard, and it's kind of, yeah, and you've reached a point you can't go back, I'm
Yeah.
afraid.
Mm. Yeah.
You're creating this, you can create whatever you want. There is
Yeah.
just no go back from that. So that's my favorite thing. And there is also that part of me that sometimes feels a bit sadistic, because you can see, I see my clients like, God damn it, like,
Yeah.
life's so much harder now. I can't just blame other people for it.
Right.
But,
Right.
of course, the rewards are more than worth it.
I can so relate to that.
No more excuses.
Yeah. What are some of your own like personal tried and true rituals or routines that help you cultivate a deeper relationship with your own embodied experience?
Mm. Funny enough, I was just talking to my magic teacher about one of them today. I'm going to mention two, if that's okay, because they're
Yeah,
quite
yeah,
different.
yeah.
The first one is the one I was talking to my magic teacher about earlier, and is something I've probably done now for maybe 3 years. And it's only in maybe the last year I've become more insistent, let's say, in our clients also doing this ritual, which is, the first part's the creation of a decree. And it's a very clearly named a decree, as in you are deciding this is how you show up, this is how you live. And that decree's got several parts. It often includes a medicine name, a unique version of a particular archetype. It then has aspects of your unique genius. It has aspects around your sacred vision. It might include something or someone that you've made a vow to. And so that's the kind of first part of it, is creating that, which in itself requires a lot of work. You know, it's deep work to even uncover those aspects of yourself. Once that's then created, we speak that into being every morning, speaking into being. This is who I am. This is who I decide to be. This is how I live this day. And I do mine in the shower every morning, and I have a kind of sigil that I write on my sort of steam in my shower screen at the same time as I speak it out. So it's kind of got lots of elements, as in it's got the voice, it's got that kind of embodied energetic of who I've come here to be, and at the same time I'm working the sigil at the same time as I speak it out. So that was, I think, again, took me time to actually realize how powerful that was. That's what I was saying to my magic teacher earlier. I think for the first couple of years, I think I was just doing it, not really, it felt like a good thing to do. And I had no idea, was it making a difference or not? And there was a point where I haven't got science to say this is really making a difference, but I know it is. I know it in my bones. This is creating a change. So that, again, for me now has become non-negotiable, certainly for myself personally, but also for our clients. Like, why wouldn't you choose to do an act that is so powerful, doesn't actually take any extra time, as in it takes as long as I'm in the shower. In fact, this morning I had 15 minutes to get ready. I was laying in bed at I was working on my phone, but I was laying in bed still. I tend to do that in the mornings. And I suddenly realized I don't normally start work till 10, and I suddenly thought, oh my goodness, I've got a call at 9:30 and I've got to wash my hair. And so I dived into the shower and I was washing my hair, and I remember thinking, like, yeah, when clients say they've not had time lately to speak their decree out, here's me going from laying in bed, in the shower, washing my hair, and then I'll be kind of like getting my makeup and dry hair in 15 minutes, and I still have time to speak out my decree. There's no excuses, God damn it. So that's the first one. The second one is a very, very simple practice, and it's one of the ones I invite women into, often one of the first practices, which is simply breast massage. And no kind of like right way of doing it, just use some kind of, usually a base oil. I use jojoba plus an essential oil. I use rose essential oil for everything. And just simply putting some of their hands, massaging their breasts in whatever way feels good for them, for as long as it feels good for them. But the main thing is just to be really present, really in that complete awareness of the experience, of the sensations, and what that means for them. And that really simple ritual, I've had such incredible feedback from women, the profound differences that's made for them in terms of the connection with their body, connection with their breasts. They're going from a kind of almost like loathing experience of their breasts to something that actually feels really beautiful. A deeper connection with their body more generally, like so many incredible stories just from that one simple ritual. So it's become one of my favorites. It's, again, something I do actually twice a day. I do it morning after my shower and then before I go to bed. And again, it's hard to know for sure when you've been doing things for so long, like what actually is happening. But even me, little miss kind of science brain, there's a point where you're like, no, it works, it's really powerful. And so for me, they're kind of two absolutely I have others too, but they're two really non-negotiable rituals.
I love that. I wanted to say with the stating your decree in the shower, I find just being in water, like being in a shower or being in a tub or swimming, there's something, I think it's quite a feminine element as well. And it's, you know, in the shower, I often have like some of my best ideas come to me, and it's like the most
Mm.
inconvenient moment because I can't really write it down or anything. But I feel that water element somehow like brings that more alive in me somehow.
Mm.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I like that.
definitely. I often refer to the bath as my water temple, and
Yes.
yeah, I mean, I have baths all the time, but particularly, I think there's like times where it just feels like, yeah, it's a lovely place to be. But then on Saturday morning in particular, that is very much a ritual. That's very
Mm,
much me going into my water temple. My husband takes the children out, and it's me in that bath for, couple of hours sometimes, just
yeah.
completely in that temple. Nothing
Yeah.
else exists.
I love it. I like to ask this question always too. So who or what is one of your greatest sources of inspiration and why?
Mm. Can I give two?
Yes,
I'm naughty actually, the second time I've
that's
done
fine.
that.
Fine.
I'm greedy.
That's all right.
I must admit, I often say I love a woman in her appetite, but it's mainly because, 'cause I
That's
need to
good.
say that because I'm constantly of mine. um, so the first one, they're very different, the two people I'm going to mention. The first one is Elon Musk.
Mm,
And he gets a ton of criticism. He's in no way this kind of perfect being. And there's a couple of reasons that he is a kind of inspiration for me. One is that ability to risk being delusional, seen
mm,
as delusional, spoken about as delusional. He's in the business of imagining things that are beyond most people's
yeah,
imagination and then taking aligned action on them. And as far as I'm concerned, we need people like that.
yeah.
Whether or not you agree with what he's doing, like what he's doing, to see someone living in a way that we only often see in films,
Right.
to me, that is as inspiring as it gets. That just, for
Mm,
me, is magical. I mean, that is a magical act, living in
yeah.
that way. So there's a secondary part to this, which is very, very recent. um I only found out, I don't know, 3 weeks or so ago that I'm autistic. What was called Asperger's years ago, it's now all called autism. And it's funny, it's like he and I are kind of lives mirror. He's literally just announced that he
Hmm.
described it still as Asperger's, but he's just announced that he's got Asperger's, which was blatantly obvious anyway. It's not exactly
Hmm.
it wasn't like I didn't think he probably did.
Yeah, right.
um but again, for me and for others who are on the spectrum, and certainly for younger people growing up, we really need those role models to say
Mm,
that, as far as I'm concerned, it's a superpower. And
yeah.
we need people modeling these differences, these neurodivergencies,
Mm,
as a superpower. And so that takes something he's already modeling to everyone. And I think to do it from that lens of someone who is autistic, for me, that
mm,
makes it even more important,
mm,
even more inspiring. So
mm.
that's the first one. You won't
Yeah.
expect me to say him, I'm guessing. The other one is Maya Angelou.
Mm,
And my goodness, as I was pondering this interview earlier, I went back and watched a video of her uh, reading her poem, um, probably for the, I don't know how many times I've watched her reading this, but it's her reading Still I Rise. And
mm,
my goodness, I'll send you the link to this particular reading because it's so powerful. But my goodness, as a model of embodied sovereignty,
mm,
someone who has come from, we talk about that kind of wounding, my goodness, such abuse, such wounding, and then alchemize it into this just absolute, it's like the word model doesn't even come close to what that woman is, what she's embodying, what she's showing is possible. I mean, she's just luminous.
mm.
She is
Yeah.
saying, like, here I am, and I can do and be whatever I want. here I am.
Yeah.
And every time I watch that, I can feel the activation happening here
Mhm.
in me.
Yeah.
it
Oh,
it shows me like
yeah.
that is possible, that exists, my God. um and it just, yeah, it's, I can't think of anyone that is able to embody it to that
Yeah.
level, where again every time I watch it I feel like I've been kind of like reactivated all over again. I literally
Mm.
watched it like twice back to back earlier. Again, I've lost track how many times I've watched her read that in the past. So yeah, it's like her and her whole life as a whole, but like
Right.
literally you could take that one YouTube video and that on its own is so inspiring, it could last you a lifetime.
Yeah. I believe I've watched it, but it's been a few years. I wanted to touch back on Elon because, well, so these were people I wasn't expecting you to say, which I love. I love when I'm like surprised. And I feel very similarly about Elon. It's like to me, it's like I see this person. At first, I'm like, this person's like kind of crazy, Like years ago, I'm like, who does he think he is? I would have a lot of judgment about it. And like more and more lately, it's like I'm like, no, this person is a true visionary, like, truly, truly
Yes.
embodying that visionary, sovereign person, and it's remarkable. And I completely agree that it's like even if you don't agree what he's envisioning, it's like that the level of which he is envisioning and making it happen is remarkable. It's so impressive, and it's
Yeah.
incredibly inspiring. And with Maya Angelou, I could be wrong, but I believe someone else that came to mind when you were talking about her is Oprah Winfrey,
Hmm.
who I think was mentored by Maya Angelou.
I
I'm
think you
pretty
could be
sh-
right,
I'm
actually.
pretty
Yeah.
sure,
Mm.
but she just came out with this book that I just thought it just came to mind and thought it sounded interesting. But she just came out with this book about her whole journey as a child and what she went through and everything.
Mm.
That sounds quite fascinating, and that same kind of alchemizing of her hardship and trauma as a child, especially a Black girl in the South at the time that she grew up. So
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
yeah.
Again, it doesn't leave us with very far to go in terms of being victimized by our own past when you
Right.
see examples like that.
Right. I know. It's like to see where she came, like this book, she's shared bits of it on social media, and it's like to see where she came from and knowing who she is
Mm.
now, it's like, okay, there's a lot of potential that a lot of us aren't tapping into, right? Along some of the earlier questions, when we talk about the masculine and feminine, some people like intuitively understand this kind of as an embodied energy or two sides of a polarity, like yin or yang, day and night. They're kind of opposing but inextricably intertwined and harmonized when it's healthy. And yet many people still don't really understand. It's conflated with gender roles or unconscious judgment that often causes like dysfunction or misunderstanding or disconnection in relationship with ourselves and with others. So I'm not sure how often you still get asked to describe this like kind of masculine and feminine with people that you work with, but I would love to ask you now just how I would like to hear in your words like how you share this with people.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I don't tend to get asked that question very much anymore. And I used to, I don't know if I ever have actually been asked it that much, but I think I used to not get asked it because I used to come out with a whole bunch of caveats.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Kind of like, there's no question left to ask because I'm going to
Right.
cover everything.
Yeah.
There's no way anyone can be offended or misunderstand because I've said everything there is to
Yeah.
say. So it's definitely before,
Yeah.
not much being asked just because of that reason. In the last couple of years, as I've not been so interested in caveating, I still haven't, and it may just be because by the time people kind of find their way to me and our work, they've already got a pretty good sense
Hmm.
of what we're about. But
Yeah.
I will still answer your question. So, um, because I have such a deep love and reverence for archetypes. I shared, I think, a couple of days ago that that was true right from very small child. I was obsessed with myths and legends, and in a really like, well, autistic,
Mhm.
obsessive way, where I used to just read and learn about all the different kind of Greek and Roman myths and legends, and not realizing then that I'd kind of ultimately end up working with
Mhm.
archetypes day in, day out as an adult. And I think that's a really helpful lens through which to see the masculine feminine, because just as we all have this very deep innate understanding of archetypes like king or queen, we're going to have our
Mhm.
kind of unique filters on that, sure, but I could ask anyone, what do I mean when I talk about a queen? They're going to know. They're
Yeah.
going to have like thoughts, feelings, like visual images come to mind. They're going to know. Not
Mm.
going to need me to tell them what that means. Similarly for a king. Similarly, we work with all sorts of archetypes in our way: priests, priestesses, magicians,
Mhm.
like witches, all sorts. And similarly, we have the same archetypal understanding of the masculine feminine.
Mhm.
And when we're looking at it through that lens, it's very easy for people to recognize, like, oh, yeah, this isn't about kind of like what it means now to be a
Mhm.
woman or a man or what I'm trying to rail against. We can see that these archetypes have shown up throughout history, across time, in all kinds of ways. You don't need me to tell you that. You can see it and feel it and touch it yourself.
Mm.
And of course there's ways that we can say, oh, so the feminine's non-linear and the masculine's linear, and the masculine's the frame and the feminine's the picture, or the
Mhm.
feminine's the river and the masculine's the bank. And it's not to say those aren't useful things, but in some ways I think they're overlaying with information something that actually is a very clearly felt experience
Mm.
that is beyond. Again, there is a kind of, there's, as far as I'm concerned, our human biology is very important, but it's actually
Mhm.
beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the more we can come from that, like first principles understanding of these things, and not need to kind of apologize for them or say it's not that and it's not that and I'm against that, but just like
Mm.
these things exist.
Yeah.
They are. They are. I know they are. Make of them what you will. And for me, there is a kind of cleanliness that comes with that, where
Mm.
we can then be in a sovereign place of choosing into whether it's something that we want to make conscious in our lives. If we are, again, for me, there was a very clear sense of a calling to
Yeah.
embody the feminine.
Mm.
And at that point, it was a bit kind of like, are you kidding me? I'm a lifelong feminist. I was
Mhm.
raised by a single father as a feminist. Like, hell no. And and yet, um, and so some people have a very clear calling like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a sort of more of a gentle recognition that something feels like this is their path, but that comes from something beyond an intellectual understanding
Yeah.
or nice ideas. And interestingly, I'm just going to say something, this last piece. I actually spent a couple of years going very deep into Taoism, which is obviously, very much made up with this idea of yin yang.
Mhm.
And went very, very deep into that, but then also has how that has a kind of modern application in terms of polarity and inversion and first principles. Strangely or not, and I don't think it is from the lens of what I've just talked to you about, when I then devoted myself to the feminine and worked in this way with men and women, it doesn't actually make sense to me to really overlay what I know about yin yang with masculine and feminine.
Mm.
For me, they actually feel like they are ways of understanding the world and energetics that actually exist
Mhm.
in their own right. Are there similarities? Are there ways that sometimes it's useful to describe that? Yes. I just don't, because it doesn't make sense to me. And I
Mm.
think they're two systems that are really powerful in their own right,
Mm.
but we don't need to conflate them to kind
Yeah.
of like almost ease one in under the tablecloth, if you know what I mean. For
Yeah.
me, there is a very, very distinct, clear archetypal energetic of the masculine feminine that is undeniable. And, you know, we can argue with that if we want, but hey, as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned, it's there.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I never even thought of it that way, where because I think it is so conflated in our language when in this kind of work where we say like the masculine and feminine, or yin and yang, kind of put it together. Even like I teach yin yoga, and it's like I'm like, yeah, it's like the kind of the more feminine kind of yoga, in a way. But I
I
like
don't think
that.
there's anything wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
I just think we're almost diluting
Yes.
the power of them by kind of
Yeah.
almost, and again, I do think sometimes it's done in a way to kind of like soften the blow a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm done with that.
Yeah. No, I like that, kind of pulling that apart more with its like original meaning. So we have a few minutes left, and this kind of segues perfectly into my last share and question. So I first got introduced to you through a mutual friend who tagged me in a very beautiful and raw and poetic Facebook post about what women really crave from men, underneath all of the guise and the facade. And this was back in 2018. And it got quite the social celebration as well. And this
Yeah,
post,
much to my distress at the time.
I do remember like reading your post about like, oh, should I have posted this? And we're all like, no, yes, you should have. We love it. And this post struck such a deep and resonant chord for me, particularly at this time, because I was in the midst of, this feminine awakening, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, a spiritual awakening, the descent of the feminine. It had hit me that summer, and it was so unexpected, and I don't know what triggered it. And it was a deep, embodied, visceral, like, knowing, and I just immediately like understood the masculine and feminine in this totally like different way, much more embodied, and not just the concept of it, right? And so when my friend tagged me in this post, I'm like, yes, she gets it, because I was searching for people who really got it, on this intuitive, deeper level. So that poem still sticks in my mind sometimes, and so I just wanted to ask if you would be open to reading it.
Yes, I would. Thank you for asking. Yes, a very long time since I've read it. It was interesting rereading it earlier and feeling actually the same sort of rush of like, wow, that was really revealed. I can almost feel the echoes of that kind of vulnerability hangover that I had back, what is that, 3 years ago now? But yeah, I'll be very happy to read it.
Thank you so much.
It's funny actually also because I read poems a lot. Every circle that I end, I always end with a poem. And it's very rarely one of mine. So it's funny because I'm so used to reading poetry, but this feels really novel reading one of my own.
Well, your words are beautiful.
Thank you. It's called Lian. Men, we want to tame you, contain you, restrain you, take away your roar. There's no safe place for your strength. Your directness is a damned affront. Your hardness isn't welcome here. We want you on a leash, a chain, a ball, and your balls. There, you're no threat now. Aren't you a sweet little pussycat? Look how I make you purr. You pat me with declawed paws. I can hardly feel at all. At night, I dream of lions, stallions, warriors, and kings. Softness give ways to hardness. My heart melts. My blood runs hotter. My juices flow quicker. My breath beats the time of the song as old as time. The sun rises. You no longer do. As I recoil at my creation, my dream self tugs my sleeve and speaks. Her words are virgin shades of silk. Men, I hunger for your hardness. Your directness is my desire. Your strength would soothe me, your roar rippling down my spine. The spell is broken. I watch for signs that the dawn has broken when you will arise.
I love it. It's I always love hearing people's writing in their own spoken voice too. And just one last thing I wanted to say about that is it's also this sense of how, like when you talk about the declawing the cat, right? It's like tame and sweet, and it's how also in a way we treat nature itself, right? Treat the natural world and the earth and try to, dominate it. And I just got that different perspective when you were reading it out loud. And that's also feels like this when I was having this awakenings, years ago, this not just in our own bodies, the imbalance of the masculine and feminine, but like on all levels, like how we treat our earth and the natural world as well. So
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Can I just quickly say something
yes,
about
of
that?
course.
Because
Yes.
you know, our work is called Waking the Wild for very
Mm.
much that reason. It's one of my deepest, oldest loves. And it really is a case of us wanting to control men, life, the wild through fear.
Mm.
And which makes complete sense when we are scared, when we have got these wounds that have shown us that it's not safe to not be in control.
Mm.
And just as we can reclaim those parts of us from shadow to allow us to be soft and open and receptive to, in this case, men that we're talking about, absolute same thing is true for anything really in life. And again, as you're saying, especially the natural world, which is our heritage,
Yeah.
it's where our DNA was born and raised. And I did a interview on Monday about this, that kind of return to the wild. And I was saying in that, whether I'm training as a shaman and, going to have some crazy experiences of submitting, like deeply submitting myself to the wild, being buried underground for a night, those kinds of things. Total submission, no control, giving myself over completely to the wild. Doesn't have to come like that. For some people, that's just like, why on earth would you do that? But at least being able to allow yourself to go out into nature, be led by your belly button, give yourself over to her on its own can be such a simple but such a powerful act. And I do believe again that for us to really return to ourselves, to us to be embodied and sovereign, requires us to reconnect with the wild. It's absolutely essential as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, complete joy. Amazing questions. Thank you so much for the work you're doing, Megan. Absolutely beautiful.
So for our listeners, if you want to find out more about Lian and her offerings, you can visit her website, which is primalhappiness.co. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, review, and share. I also have a special free gift for all of my listeners. Just go to meganhart.coach/gift. That's MEGANHART.COACH/GIFT. All my love to you. Until next time.